Hello, I'm Smriti Vidyarthi, coming to you from Kigali, Rwanda. I had the opportunity to speak exclusively to President Paul Kagame. He's led this nation for close to 20 years and has been at the forefront of its transformation. He speaks about regional integration, frosty ties with Uganda, and the impact his childhood has had on his leadership. Here now is that exclusive conversation. President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, thank you so much for giving NTV your time. It's great to see you.
You're welcome.
Now, Rwanda has recently especially been hosting a large number of conferences, international conferences, and also exhibitions, and there are plenty more to come. What is the ultimate goal?
Well, the ultimate goal is to create an environment in our country that is welcoming, host such a big gatherings as conferences or other events with all the benefits that come with it. I think it benefits everyone. It benefits the country, it benefits whoever comes to the country and has in mind what to do and building on what the country offers.
And are these relations that you're trying to boost with other African nations or foreign nations? Because we do know that you are creating very strong ties with Qatar, for example.
All that comes with the relations, how you relate to people, actually beginning with the domestic situation. How people relate with each other, even in our country, is very important. Then how the country relates with neighbors and then beyond. You can go as far as you wish. It's always very important. Good relations always come with a lot of benefits.
Speaking about relations, let's now focus on the region and the East African community in particular. Very recently, you said that integration is a necessity. It is happening. It will continue despite people's differences. And no doubt there have been differences amongst the East African nations, which of course is natural and expected in any sort of a relationship. But at this point, how would you, or how healthy would you say the East African community is?
I think overall, the East African community, the people of East African community are making good progress in many ways, even with the setbacks that one can always see, hear of, and talk about or experience. Again, from what I said, I was saying, yes, it's one thing to say this is a good thing, this is the right thing to do. Then it's another to be able to do it at the level that actually is intended or is desirable. Because of human nature and different other activities, or some of the events or things that happen in spite of all your wishes and best intentions. There will always be some ups and downs, but I think you keep the eye on the overall situation.
Does the East African community have the mechanisms to resolve these disputes, do you think?
There is always going to be one mechanism that is simple, straightforward, and always there. That is people reaching out to one another and saying, let's talk about it. Right, this doesn't need to follow any
particular mechanism.
Yes, absolutely. So at least we have that. And when there is a problem, there is always that channel to start with.
And do you believe that the EAC has reached the intended level of integration at this point in time?
The progress made over the years is very significant. For example, East Africans move freely. They do business with one another very freely. There are certain guidelines and rules and things that have been put in place that help us conduct different businesses the right way. Maybe we haven't been there 100%, maybe at 70%. We need definitely to do more.
All right, just a moment ago, you talked about reaching out as a mechanism to resolve certain disputes. And this now brings me to the differences that Rwanda has been having with Uganda. Now, the two nations did have a meeting under Angola's leadership, and a second meeting did not materialize. Tensions between the nations also led to some border points being closed, and this has affected both nations. How would you describe your relationship with President Yoweri Museveni?
Well, you have already described it.
From your point of view, because
but,
on the onset, this is how we're
I'll
viewing
just add a
it.
few things by saying, even before we had meetings in Angola, bring the two countries and officials, leaders together, we had actually been meeting bilaterally, discussing directly some of these things. Then there came this other framework in which we discussed. That is ongoing. We've been told there is a meeting now going to take place, I think on the 18th of this month. Should have happened earlier, changed it twice. But there are always going to be reasons, or maybe even good ones, why things don't happen as planned or as talked about. So, but at least that the intention is there, that we will meet at some point and see if we can iron out the remaining issues.
And are you optimistic that indeed those issues will be ironed out in a harmonious manner?
I've always been optimistic. It doesn't mean that it always turns out to be the way the optimism was formed on. But it's always good to be optimistic that things are going to work, because as you also mentioned earlier, if things were addressed properly and issues resolved, it's really for the good of everyone. Everyone benefits. So why not even remain optimistic that at some point things will work out the way we want them to work out.
And ultimately, what do you believe it will take to normalize the relations between Uganda and Rwanda? Because the issues are sensitive.
In a way, one can call them sensitive, if you will, but these are not issues that cannot be addressed. That is to begin with. There's nothing so complex that people can't talk about it, and later on, better still, act upon them in a real sense to get going forward. So I'm guessing logic, good reason will prevail, and we might find a way forward.
All right, we look
but
forward.
What is very important is to have good regard for each other.
And do you believe both nations currently have that for each other?
It will come.
Okay. Okay, let's have a look at the continent at large now. Africa, of course, does have its fair share of challenges, as do all countries in the world. But what do you think that African nations really need to do and focus on to overcome their developmental challenges?
First, we need to understand what is it that we haven't been getting right for all the areas.
And what is that in your view?
In terms of our development. The Africans have to make a decision and a choice. Are we comfortable being where we are or have been for decades? 2, is it possible to change that situation towards what we want? We need to also be sure there is something we want that is right for us and that we deserve. Three, what are the tools to use to achieve that? I imagine one of them is being driven by, therefore, that mindset and the set of choices and decisions we have to make. It starts with how we govern ourselves and what principles we build on, all that work in the interests of our people, and even learning lessons from elsewhere, so that even the politics that we see and play all over Africa, whichever country, is politics about that. It's politics about achieving the best we can for ourselves, for our people.
Political will, of course, is key in...
It is very much needed.
It is needed. Do you see a lot of that in Africa? And tied to that, what's your comment on the ugly monster that is corruption, that bites not only in Africa, but the world over? However, it is more rampant in some countries than others.
I think the will seems to be there, at least in terms of expressions that people make. You hear every African leader, citizen, anybody, east, west, north, south, central. People say really the right things, and you can see even the passion with which people talk about things. That's not bad, that's a good step, because everything else builds on that. So, but then that alone is not enough. Good, but not enough. You need to do something building on that. You can't just keep expressing intentions, saying this is the right thing to do, but you end up not doing it. That's where the devil lies. Now, to the point of corruption. Corruption is actually part of that governance I was talking about. Governance is broad. Good governance is very broad. It's rule of law. It's expecting things to happen, and they happen the way you expect them to do, because the right things have been done towards that. And the predictability of it, that you expect that once there is this statement done and for a reason understood, and everybody is called upon to work towards that, and then we need to see progress, we need to see results, and we need to learn lessons also along the way. A number of things, the accountability that I was talking about that has to take place, lessons learned, so that we keep making progress by avoiding some of the things you found were standing in your way to achieve what you wanted to achieve.
Now, here's just shifting focus to an interesting investment that Rwanda made. You are a big football fan, an
Yes, I
Arsenal
am.
supporter.
Yeah.
And you have, in fact, invested a lot of your energy and national resources into the club.
Yeah.
We see Visit Rwanda on the arms of Arsenal players. However, critics have argued that this money ought to have been used differently for the nation itself, as opposed to investing in football.
Yeah.
Has it reaped any returns?
It has.
In
a
what
lot,
way?
Many ways. We've seen hundreds of times more visits. And these visits are visits with money. It's not just visits. They don't come to ask me to give them money. They actually give us money. And we've been able to quantify. We see the numbers of people relating to that particular investment, numbers of, in terms of money that is spent in the country, and so on and so forth. In fact, the critics you're talking about,
Maybe they're not Arsenal fans.
they are not, most likely. But you see, critics must also be challenged in a sense. It's not enough to say this is bad, because you are a critic, and therefore somebody must believe you. But I think it is going to be okay if you criticize me and say what you're doing is wrong, and you also put numbers to it and show me how wrong it is. It's not just enough to say, no, you should have put your money there. Yes, okay, I could put my money there, but show me how that could have benefited me more than where I put my money. Second, critics are not doing the job I'm doing. They have their own jobs wherever they are. But I'm the one responsible for this situation. If I have analyzed and found that this is going to earn me something, and I'm convinced, even roaring in my mind what the would-be critics would say about it, because that's how things work if you are making an analysis of what you intend to do and the possibility of succeeding or failing. But then if all that put together, you find that there is a net plus in that, I go for that. So later on, if I'm to be held accountable for what I didn't do fine, then so be it. That's how things get done. Right. You don't do something by doing nothing. You do it by doing it, and then you fail, you succeed, you are held accountable, you explain, or you learn lessons, you pick your pieces and go.
How critical is it, do you think, that African leaders do need to change their thought processes when it comes to improving their nations? I mean, this is a prime example. You know, I doubt many would have thought of investing in a football team and reaping such returns.
But there we are still intending to do more.
Oh, really?
No, yeah, there's more coming soon, yes.
We look forward to that. But how important is it that Africa starts, you know, thinking differently about its nation and really what it can do for its people?
There's no magic wand that we can talk about, but we really have to make decisions. We have to decide what to do that gives us results. If things don't work, we try other things. For those that work, consolidate and do even more and better.
Well, speaking about more and better, coming up on the 8th and 9th of December, Rwanda is hosting Nation Media Group's inaugural Kusi Ideas Festival, and you are in fact a keynote speaker. Now, Kusi Ideas Festival touches on various themes and ideas. What do you think that Africans should really dwell on to shape their future?
Well, it's always going to be a point where you start with yourself and say, first have confidence in yourself that you can do something for yourself and maybe for others together. If everyone thinks like that, then we find we are doing things together. The second is, the way you want to direct your mind and towards what that addresses your problems or challenges. So I'm sure the KUS ideas is about that, is about galvanizing and mobilizing the African talent, ideas, and to address the African challenges. It can't just be like a song that we have to keep talking about challenges, opportunities, but nothing happening out of that. I think this moment, therefore, will be to reflect on what really is it that needs to be done, not just say it. And even looking at the history, so many statements made and intentions declared and frameworks created and policies formulated. The ultimate thing is you have to have outcomes that people are going to point to and say, this is what we wanted, this is what we deserve, and so on and so forth.
You have led Rwanda for almost 20 years now. What is it that drives you?
When I grew up and found myself a son of a refugee family and hundreds of thousands of others, trying to, make sense of what that life meant with all the kinds of deprivation that comes with it. So I had to find, as I was growing up, there are certain ideas that appeal to you, and then you relate them to yourself and how you... So then I always wanted to, more or less, either by accident or by whatever, you want to connect with and address the problems around you, and in your own interest, but in the interest maybe that is wider than that as well. So that's the kind of pathway that we found ourselves in many of us. It's not just me alone. And so my drive has always been these aspirations of addressing the challenges you face, and tapping into the opportunities that also you identify and you can have access to, and then do the best you can to deal with whatever you have to deal with. That's at least what I feel in my body and in my mind. That's what it is.
Where do you think so far you could have done better? Because we can always do better. And where do you think that you've surprised yourself by being so successful?
Maybe that complicated question is tied into the whole history of our country. Sometimes it is difficult to isolate me as an individual from the overall situation of the country. I wouldn't talk so much about failures. Maybe they are there, but I always want that part to be talked about by somebody else, maybe who was impacted by my failure.
Right.
What I could talk about that is pleasant for me and is in line with the aspirations I was talking about is that where we started from and where we are today, there is a difference, a big difference. in a sense of the positives, there has been growth. Growth for everything. Well, I've been growing myself. You can see I'm aging, I'm getting older not every year, every day. So that comes with really, you can see the big difference. We are of moving toward where we want to be. We are not there yet, but there is a movement towards that. But you also, in a realistic sense, you realize things just don't depend on you or your wishes. Things depend on the totality of the participants, the beneficiaries, others other than you. Some of the things are dictated by even factors beyond your control and beyond their control. Right. But this is the nature of management of things and life and processes. It's always going to be a collective effort. It's not easy. It's not just as easy as touching the buttons and things happen the way you want.
Right. But regardless, you're not slowing down or stopping anytime soon.
So far, so good. Yes, with all the mess one has to deal with or go through, and all the kinds of arrows fired at you, you keep going.
You persevere.
Yes.
Well, you are an inspiration to many, Mr. President. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope so. But nonetheless,
well, the critics may say differently, but there'll always be critics.
They always have they are there. It's their right to do that.
Right.
But yeah, maybe I'll have my day too
Sure.
to criticize.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to us on NTV. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Kagame, President
Absolutely.
of Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much.